Today, there are weed wagons all over New York selling
Yeah.
all types of, all by the same people that were arrested by the NYPD. And it's not just the weed, it's marketed also in chocolate, hemp. They have all kind of edibles that teenagers enjoy. So how do you feel about the same object of discussion where you arrested people is now being allowed throughout the city?
Well, it's not just marijuana, and it doesn't feel good to see because you smell it everywhere. But it's not. It's like what I said before about decriminalize many crimes. But it's not just marijuana. It's all these, and this is before 2020, before George Floyd. It happened here and other cities where they decriminalized many offenses like urinating, litter. So now, when you say, how do you feel? Police officers, and remember, they will not turn their back on us, but just imagine being a police officer, seeing somebody step off a soccer court, go to the bathroom where people could see, and knowing that if he goes over into that crowd and takes this person and asks for the ID and everything, the guy can throw it away because of the changes they've made. They've made it, they call it Office of Administrative Trials or something. And basically, there'll never be a warrant for it. You could say, thank you, officer. You don't have, you're not required to give your name. So you can just say, you know, Donald Duck, and the cops can't ask for anything further. So you know, it's one thing, they talk about defunding police, but there's something that's just as dangerous that's happened, demoralizing police.
Yes.
Exactly.
And it's demoralizing people.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the marijuana, but it's not just the marijuana. It's everything. It's littering. It's graffiti. It's jump. Wait a minute. The biggest one, for transit, jumping turnstiles.
Yes.
Yeah.
Jumping turnstiles. They decide. District attorneys are not social workers. They were not elected to interpret the law. They were elected to enforce it. And they just came up and said, you know, we're not enforcing it. Cops are still grabbing people for it, but nothing's happening.
Nothing.
And that was important. Remember when I talked about, you know, knowing the science of policing? You don't hear me speak about that a lot. Because this is, to me, this is what's most important for a commanding officer. You know, being with people. But I know about the science of policing. I know about deployment, and I know what works. And when you set that tone into that station, millions of people going every day, when hundreds of people go by and see somebody stopped in a corner and sometimes handcuffed, they know he just jumped a turnstile. And that tells them that there's order in this system. There's order in our city, there's order in the world. He did something wrong, he's held accountable for it. And they walked away from that. And that's where everything else comes. That's where all the other disregarding of laws and civilities and how we treat each other. Not everybody. I mean, there's decent people in the world in spite of the environment. But you have to have rules. You have to have
They
accountability.
took the rights away from the police and gave them to the thugs, is what they did.
That's a good point.
We criminalize crime and criminalize.
What's your thoughts on
Thank you.
the way the homeless are all over the place in the city?
Oh my goodness.
Another horror.
It's right back to what we just talked about.
Yeah.
It's
Same.
the maid of lot. We had a unit of 75 police officers, homeless outreach. They worked under the transit bureau. They worked for me. And they worked in the subways in the winter when all the homeless were in the subways, and they worked in the streets in the summer when all the homeless were up here. And they were the best at it. They were as good as any social worker, as any psychologist, and as any cop. They knew when to enforce laws and put them in handcuffs and when to find them help. And they were respected by these homeless people. Some of the homeless would tell these cops, you know, you're the only human being I get to talk to. Because they would go throughout the city and check on them. They cared. But because of this whole 2020 thing, they said, oh, no, police officers shouldn't be dealing with homeless. They're the bad guy.
No.
And they disbanded the unit.
What?
This is why we have what we have.
That's
This is it.
What
Very
did-
simple. It's like I said before. you know, in the 80s and 90s, we believed that government was behind us. Now we know that government is making decisions, making work. The government, it's decisions that the mayor and the city council made in 2020. That's the reason that there's so many homeless and stuff like that.
So it's 2020 that they disbanded that.
Yeah, yeah, right after George Floyd.
And when did they stop taking the police out of the suburbs?
What do you mean, stop?
Well,
They're there.
No, they're there.
you don't see them very much.
No, you don't.
You used to see so many.
Yes.
You probably see them.
I'm not talking about today.
Plainclothes,
Say
plainclothes.
2 years ago or with.
Yeah, they.
Plainclothes?
Is that it?
Seeing them in the subway is very difficult, by the way.
Very. And I have good.
No, I
eyesight.
mean, even if you put a lot of them there, because at any, I actually, let me give you an idea, and I want to get this right, so let me go right to my contact, because I have it saved in here, because I have it at the top of my head, but I don't want to get it wrong. Call me uncle. So, 325, so any given minute, there's 325 trains going through the system, times 10 cars. So at any given minute, right now, there's 3,200 cars moving throughout the city. So if you say, I'm going to put cops on the trains, think about your odds of seeing them on the trains, and they could be on the trains. So in a day, we're talking about 8,000 trains, because it changes throughout the day with rush hour, times 10. So in a 24-hour period, it means if I decide I want to visit every train car, and it's tomorrow, tomorrow Monday.
So how many
When you
police
retire,
are
you
there?
get to remind it.
How many police?
There's 2,600.
26.
And they've actually done a lot. And what is your name?
Linda.
Linda. Linda or Linda?
Linda.
Linda. And they've actually done a lot to supplement that. They have cops coming from the street, from patrol, and they get stop the tape. Transit cops get a lot of overtime.
Yeah.
So
Well-
you get more of them because they have a lot. They have a lot of things that are funded from the MTA and other places. So you get really getting your maximum deployment and coverage out of the MTA.
But then there's also understaffed because of the people not taking the jab. What about that?
That's the other thing.
That's another,
Yeah, like listen, we just
this is a horror.
we
This is a horror.
I mean, we were, it's like I heard someone say last night, the problem is that this thing was pushed as get it, you'll never have to worry about getting sick and getting tested your leg. The reason I got the booster, I got the vaccination, I was gonna get the booster, and I said to my doctor, but people are getting sick, and he said, people get sick with everything you take. And I said, okay, so I did it. But when I thought it was supposed to be perfect, and it wasn't perfect, then I get angry and I'm used to it. So, don't tell me it's perfect if it's not.
It's not.
Be honest with me.
It's not a vaccination.
Did you get
It is
vaccinated?
a
Actually,
gene therapy. A vaccination keeps you from getting.
Right, I always say I never got over polio.
But the other thing that is very, God really has a good sense of humor. And I just came up with another terminology. These illegal imported aliens are now overrunning our homeless shelters. And finally, the mayor is complaining and blaming Abbott and the other mayor, the other governor, instead of blaming Washington, D.C. Bowers is also saying, Bowser's doing the same thing.
Well, it is their idea, so too bad, they don't like it now.
Yeah.
Also in Delaware, they're sending the
I wonder
emails
how we got to the point where we can communicate everything we want to say by Twitter. One mayor can criticize another mayor, they probably haven't even met each other. They wouldn't know each other if they were in the same room, but they get on Twitter and it's
Everyone's a big boy.
listen, and this is what happened. We had elected officials passing legislations, based on what was on Twitter. And speaking of electeds, by the way, it wasn't just the AOCs and the left wing 2020 progressives. It wasn't just them. It was some Republicans. Because they saw what happened with AOC, how she unseated somebody, and everyone thought, wow. Remember I talked about us being afraid to even discuss this, George? And they thought, let me keep my mouth shut. And it's like we just, the Holocaust, right? Silence. the biggest perpetrator of evil
Yes.
is silence in the face of evil.
That's right.
True.
It's been, I did tell my children, because I said I hate communism and marijuana, and I would tell my kids, if you ever have problems, do not take drugs, illegal drugs, or any drugs. Just go on the floor and cry. If you can't solve the problem, maybe you'll solve it. I mean, we have to teach our children, our people, not to go to take drugs because, you have a problem. If it can't be solved, you go on the floor and cry, or look up in the sky, or come back, or it won't be solved. There are other things in life that will, you have to move on. But besides that, the government is not our friend anymore.
No,
They're
they're
not working with us.
No, they're not.
Like what they did, and Schumer, they're all making billions of dollars.
Yes, inside
And
of
or the
training and everything.
taxpayers, and this is what we have to, and we have to deal with it in Brooklyn too. They took $40 billion of American taxpayers and sent it over to Ukraine. And they say, oh, poor Ukraine. Of course it's terrible what's happening with Ukraine. But what's happening is that this government sent $40 billion to Ukraine, and these politicians are going to cash in, you invested in the Ukraine and in China, so they get money back, like a kickback when you buy stock. They sold you out. They're going to make money on the money that you worked hard for. And all these politicians are making money from, they invest in Ukraine. So they get, what you call it, kickback when you buy stocks, like a business. You put money in, you get money back. And this is what's happening. They want us to be in this chaos.
Yes,
And this is what we have to expose. You
It's like
talk about,
whack-a-mole.
Well, the question I have for you, Chief, if you were mayor,
Yes.
how would you address the public safety issue? What would you do? A couple key points. How would you tackle it the first day of office?
Well, I think what he could do more of is to shout out louder against his counterparts in government.
Yeah.
He does speak to that. He does speak to that. We need to his credit, every time there's somebody a revolving door justice, bail reform, he speaks out against it. But I think he's got to name these people.
Right.
You got to point to Alvin Bragg. You got to point to Eric Gonzalez. You got to point to these people who are not prosecuted, and you can't talk in generality. And I think he has the political capital to do that. He's got momentum. He's a mayor. He's got to kind of be a lot more assertive and aggressive with Governor Hochul.
Yeah.
we have to expose her for what she did.
I'm telling you.
You have to, we have to expose her. It's going free.
And we
Would you be willing to look into it, Chief?
I'm
Would
sorry?
you be willing to look into it to see what law they violated?
Oh,
Which?
plenty.
With the Holco.
With what she did?
Well, listen,
Conspiracy.
but there's some great minds looking at this now as we speak, and I'm willing to watch as this happens.
It's become, that particular issue has become national, even though they wanted to hide it. They won't talk about it.
It is national.
But now
We,
it's
the small vocal.
bigger than they
do something.
thought that they could bury it. Now it's
Well,
fully.
Chief, a woman like me, a 9/11 family, my sister died with the remdesivir 9 months ago. I served
Sorry
my
for all this.
community.
What's your sister's name?
My Diana.
God bless her.
Okay, now well, Chief, I've known you for many years. Every time you saw me, what did you notice that was on?
Flag.
Right? Like, look at Desiree. Okay? Because I love my country. I love my country. I love my fellow Americans. But now I am being looked at with this new policy, the HR 4350 and the HR 4050. I'm the new terrorist.
What I would prescribe to anyone who has a problem with this country? Take a
Leave.
few
Go to
Uber
the
rides.
third world
Take a few Uber rides.
Yeah.
Chances are it's going to be someone from another country. And just ask them a couple of questions. So how do you like driving an Uber? Where do you come from? And the chances are very high that they will volunteer how much they love being in this country.
That's
They
right.
do it all the
Absolutely.
time.
Oh, I
You ask them a
talk
few
about
questions, they'll tell you, I love this country. I
And
love
they'll go
it."
for
And
Trump.
they'll say this from Asia, they'll say
I've
this
spoken
from the
to them.
Middle East, They'll say this
Yeah.
from Africa, they'll say I love this
Get your
country.
citizens
They
focused
just
on.
have big.
But it's the Americans who hate this country.
Yeah, right, with the.
It's the Americans, our elected officials.
CCP. It was massive.
There was one that I do a monthly column for the Rockaway Wave. It's the first week of the month of it. If you look on my social media, they're all public sites and you go back. But there was one that I did for July, first week of July. And I was in a, there was DC, I was actually going to the Holocaust Memorial, the National Memorial. And I was going there for the purpose of writing an article about it, my feelings. So I went in there knowing that I was by myself. I was going to take notes of how I felt as I went through it. And I did this 5 years ago. I didn't give it the time. I want to give it now. So I knew this day was going to wipe me out. And I was going in there to experience as much as I could. I wasn't with anybody. We didn't have any place else to go. This is why I was going there, because I wanted to write this article. I went in December, and I think I put out the article in March or April. But, so on the way there, I get in the Uber, right? And I knew that I'd be not looking at my phone for a couple hours, so I figured, let me catch up. So I'm sitting there, and I'm in the back, and I'm looking down, and I'm listening, and something struck me. There's a human being driving, and I'm ignoring it. So I put the phone down. I said, so, what's your first name? So he's got the mask on. I hear some type of Middle Eastern accent. He says Khomeini. So, like the Ayatollah Khomeini. He didn't say that. And we start chatting, and I asked him how he likes Uber. My standard questions, and I asked him, and the one question was a question I'll always ask from now on. I said, what did you do before Uber? So now remember, this is an immigrant with a mask and an accent, and he says, I worked for the United States military in Fort Benning. I was an intelligence analyzer, and I would prepare soldiers who were going off to Afghanistan. I said, what? And it turns out he was born in Afghanistan. He was 17 when the Americans came there. He was so excited that they were going to free that country. He believed of all the war and the brutality, and he worked with the government. And he became, like we wear flags, he became a patriotic Afghan and joined. He was the second class of the Afghan National Army, the first one ever to work with the Allies. And he did that until 2015. He came to this country, he worked with the government, and pulled out of Afghanistan. I probably did away with his position. So I said to him, are you a citizen? And he turned around, and even through a mask, you should have seen how bright his face was. He said it was one of the biggest days of my life in my family. I became a citizen.
Great.
So anyone who doesn't love this country or has that position of, oh, I'm better off here, but we need a lot of improvement. Go ride with Khomeini, who's in Washington, D.C. right now, real feel of 107. I hope whoever's in his cab, ask him a few questions. And they too will be proud to be an American after they finish with them. I'm going to wrap up here.
Oh, man.
Otherwise, you'll never go about your Sunday night. And I can talk to you forever. Thank you all. I love to come back.
Chief, just one quick thing. You reminded me when you were talking about the bumper story. On my block,
Anthony Daddyville.
on East 4th Street, was, you might know from back in the day, Joey Gallo's mother, Mary Gallo. We used to rent a parking spot in the back, my father, and one day I noticed someone pushing in a Corvette. She had a big backyard with 3 garages. And then a Cadillac Eldorado was in my brother's spot where he was renting. I was saying, I'm a kid. It was 1980 something. I'm like 10 years old, 11 years old. I said, what the heck is that? Why is that there? Why are they pushing the car into the... So I called my father, whatever, and we called the police. And wound up being it was someone was renting the garage from her. Probably they knew each other. And they were stripping cars.
Wow.
2 Corvettes. There was 2 Corvettes and a Cadillac Eldorado. So luckily those cars got back, but it just reminded me, in the 80s,
Those were
I
big.
remember the bumpers.
And the bumpers were big.
Bumpers, hood ornaments.
I went back into the car with this kid. I said, I don't understand this guy. I couldn't talk him out of it. Sorry, you gotta